This is an audiobook copyrighted as an unpublished work at copyright.gov. This video and narration have been created using Clipchamp video editor. Artwork generated by Imagine AI. Little Secrets fairy tale sound created by Julius H. Downloaded from pixabay.com.
Legends Teller presents Legends of Hayaliaini. Subchapter 1. Then came conflict.
The grand star hung low on the horizon, bathing the village of Neum with its lavender rays. The lesser stars now bloomed like celestial flowers as their mother went to her rest. Some of the villagers took a moment to admire the starglow that marked the coming of night. It was a beautiful end to the last day of the 5th season. The village elder was still tending to one of the cornberry patches. A faint scowl was on the human's face as she rubbed her chin. With her free hand, she was pointing at each berry in turn with the black claw of her index finger. Her mental count kept coming up short. Suddenly there was a rustling and the old woman tensed. Her hand darted down into the bushy patch, catching a hold of fabric easily with her talons. A yelp squeaked from the patch and she recognized it right away. She hauled up a small boy with a messy black tuft of hair and snarled,
"Hodgtons! By the 5, I knew it was you. Get out of there!"
The old woman had a firm grip on the collar of the boy's tunic. She whipped him up and through the air with surprising strength despite her age. The boy soared several meters, then landed with a thud on his backside. He gave out another cry and rolled over to rub his sore tailbone.
"Hodgtons!"
The woman cried out to a man standing on the opposite side of the village near the palisade gate.
"Your scamp is at it! Again!"
A look of fright entered Hodgtons's eyes as he quickly looked in the same direction. Sure enough, Hodge had spun at the mention of scamp. Already the boy felt the glare upon him as his father quickly closed the distance with fast strides.
Again? Don't tell me he was in the patch.
A quick look at his face will tell enough.
Hodgtons attempted to wipe his maw with the sleeve of his tunic, but it was too late. The lavender rays of the grand star made it easy to spot the yellow juice and bits of berry flesh stuck to his lips and chin.
2 days? You couldn't even go a full 2 days before you disobeyed me? When are you going to learn self-control?
Hodge threw his hands out wide to his sides in exasperation, his black, braided ponytail cracking like a whip behind him.
Get up.
He reached down, grabbing his son by the collar.
Dust yourself off and get home now. I'll sort out your punishment later, but rest assured you will be doing your mother's chores for the next month.
The boy gave a yip and quickly ran, covering his backside with his hands in fear that his father might strike it with the scabbard of his sword like last time. The father's attention was already back to the elder as he asked,
"How many this time?"
The hag still simmered as she crossed her arms over her sagging breasts.
10. At least.
She added with a spat.
10?
The father stuttered, then whirled to shout towards his son.
2 months.
At least.
The woman repeated before stamping off to the lodge in the village's center.
"Trouble again, Bonfather?"
A younger male voice asked. Hodge's expression remained dour as he glanced over his shoulder, then turned to face the newcomer. The honorific emphasized that the younger man was not his son by blood, an indirect way to say he disapproved of Hodge's actions.
I have a right to be stern. That's the 3rd time this Pente's raided the patch.
The young man's expression did not change as he chided.
"You know children can't resist cornberries. They're sweeter than candy. We've all raided the patch at that age for 1 or 2.
10?
Hodge cut him short. The young man opened his mouth, then blinked, and his mouth remained open as he was caught off guard.
Yes, 10. And he never picks the small or half-rotten ones. Always the biggest and ripest. On a good harvest, that's a full kilogram worth 5 rice sheets."
Hodge snapped in return at his bondson. The young man gave a look of shame as he ran his clawless left hand through his blonde hair.
My apologies, Father. It was wrong of me to chastise you.
Hodge softened a little as his adopted son dropped the honorific.
It's fine, Win. You were only defending your younger brother.
A defense made in ignorance. I had heard he was gluttonous, but I thought it was the grandmother exaggerating.
Unfortunately not. He's actually gotten worse. I am starting to doubt if Hodgtens will ever earn his own name.
The father lamented while stroking his braided goatee with his clawless right. Win gave a chuckle.
Perhaps the problem is he doesn't want to? Many would consider it an honor to be named the son of Hodge, greatest swordsman in the village.
He looked to his father.
He does admire you greatly. The children say he brags all the time about it.
Hodge grunted.
As if that will help when I'm no longer around. I would have started his training, but I can't trust him with a blade. He has no discipline.
He reached down to run his fingers along the scabbard of his sword.
No, I've already decided you will inherit my sword when I am gone. Blood or no, you have earned it. You're the finest fighter I've trained, and it was an honor to take you in when your blood father fell to bandits.
Win gave a look of concern toward his adopted father.
That would be a great dishonor to your true son.
Hodge waved a hand dismissively.
That will be his own shame to bear. I have been more than generous with him. Sooner or later he will have to learn his actions have consequences. The only reason we settled this close to the world wood is because cornberries can only grow in the soil at its borders. It is dangerous being this close to the puppet's realm without Hodgtens making it worse.
Win turned his attention to the great forest that covered more than half of their world. Even with the palisade walls blocking most of the view, the endless sea of trees could be easily seen as they stretched well past the horizon.
Those savages won't attack any outside of the forest.
Not for more than a millennia since the War of Flames.
Hodge looked warily to the trees.
But Everbrand is a different story.
Everbrand?
Win smirked.
Isn't that a legend made to frighten children? I'm far too old for such tales.
It's no mere tale.
Hodge gave his son a stern look.
Though I've never seen him myself, nor my father before me, the legends of that war are passed down through my family. I do not doubt them.
And yet, no one has reported any sign of his passing for hundreds of years. Not sober, anyway. If he is as horrible as tales say, it would be impossible for such a being to go unnoticed.
Everbrand suffers no survivors.
Hodge echoed one of the verses from a legend, still keeping an eye on the wood.
Disbelieve his existence if you will, though I say it unwise. Either way, the bandits are certainly a real threat.
I will not deny that statement.
A grim look crossed Win's face as he looked down to the scabbard and blade he had inherited from his bloodfather. Following his eyes, Hodge reached over to clutch his bonson's shoulder.
I will not suffer any more loss of life. We need supplies and materials to shore up our defenses, and we need every rice sheet the crops can bring.
His eyes then turned down to the sword at his own belt.
You, Nares, and myself are the only bearers of true steel swords in the village. No matter how well I train the rest, there's only so much faux steel can do.
Win nodded his agreement.
I dread the thought of an attack by bandits that are better armed. Though I'm confident we will still win with your training, it'll be a bloody victory.
Thankfully, the dwarves do not part with their works for small prices. And they are well armed should any be foolish enough to try theft.
Hodge then noticed something was missing from Win's back.
Where is your arbalest?
Win frowned at that.
It's gone missing. I always keep it stored in my hut, but it's not where I left it.
Hodge gave a sigh and looked to his own hut.
Hodgtens, most likely more of his mischief. I saw the way he was eyeing it several days ago.
Go easy on him, father.
I will make no promise of that.
Hodge grumbled angrily.
Head on over to the gate and switch places with Nares. His shift on lookout is about over. I still need to apologize to the grandmother for my son's theft.
Win winced.
I don't envy you that task.
Count your blessings, Win.
He smirked to his bondson.
Someday you'll meet a woman and may have a hodge-tens of your own.
Win was caught off guard again and couldn't hide his grimace.
I shall pray I won't be so unlucky.
Hodge smirked at his reaction.
There's an old saying, a happy marriage brings spoiled offspring, but an unhappy marriage forges strong leaders.
Win looked disappointed.
That's not a fair saying.
Life isn't fair.
The father lightly punched his eldest son's shoulder before heading towards the elder's lodge. A sudden cry from the gate diverted him once more. His eye caught the motion of one of the village guards waving from atop the tower next to the gate. Knowing it was Nares, Hodge gripped his scabbard and swiftly jogged over.
What is it?
He asked as Nares reached the bottom of the ladder.
Bandits,
The gruff warrior said with a grunt. Though his short-cut salt and pepper hair and wrinkles gave away his age, his arms bulged with muscles and made it clear he was not one to take lightly.
Sure enough, they waited until after starglow. I nearly didn't see them. One didn't douse his torch fast enough before they crested the hill.
Could you tell how many there were?
Win asked with worry.
And did they seem to be carrying anything?
Nares shook his head.
Not with certainty. They were too far off. I'd say there were at least 2 5s. If you mean carrying ladders, then no. But I'm certain one was riding a mastiff. That one moved too quickly in the dark to be on foot.
Win hissed through his clenched, carnivorous teeth as he bore his fangs.
That sounds like the band my father fell to. How many would have a tamed mastiff?
Not many in these parts.
Hodge frowned as he reached up to rub his braided beard with his left.
Tesh, we lost both our mastiffs in the last skirmish.
He lamented with a curse.
Are you sure there was only one?
I told you I wasn't sure at all.
Nares repeated.
There's at least one on a mastiff. Maybe more that I didn't notice. Just be glad we got any warning at all.
Small blessings.
Hodge muttered.
Close and seal the gate. By your words, most of them are coming by foot. We have about 2/5 of an hour before they arrive.
20 minutes is a bit generous.
Win interjected.
Better to assume 15 if that.
The lad has the right of it.
Nares concurred as he motioned to the other villagers. 3 joined him and they split into 2 pairs, one for each door. The rusty hinges groaned in protest as the timbers slammed against the frame. A wooden bar was then placed across the interior brackets. The villagers got to work hammering in wooden pins through the bracket holes to hold the bar fast as Nares returned.
We number 2 5s and 3 that can fight. The advantage in numbers would be ours if not for the mastiff rider.
They'll have to break through the gate first. They may even retreat once they see we are ready.
Hodge scowled as he looked towards the top of the palisade.
If only we constructed battlements for our archers.
No use lamenting what can no longer be done.
Nares grunted.
I'm more curious about why they are here.
Win lifted a brow.
The harvest wouldn't be reason enough.
He means why with our current defenses.
Hodge chimed in.
Unless there are far more than 2 5s coming.
Nares stroked his chin through his unkempt beard.
The force I saw is coming from the 5th cardinal, right for our gate. It's possible the torch may have been no accident.
He frowned at this.
If that be their ruse, and I was leading the assault, I would have 2 other forces coming from the 1st and 4th. Probably carrying ladders to get over the palisade.
He looked over his shoulder to the side of the village opposite of the gate. The long sea of trees could still be seen in the starlight.
The world wood is to the 2nd and 3rd cardinals. I wouldn't risk taking my soldiers through the trees. The poppets sense all under those boughs and mercilessly slaughter any that intrude, especially men.
Then we're dealing with more than 10.
Win commented shakily.
They may have more than one mastiff after all.
The possibility is higher but still unlikely. You have to raise a mastiff from birth for riding, and nearly twice as long to retrain it to bear another. It's better to kill an enemy's mastiff rather than take it for yourself. It won't obey and will go mad once its rider has been slain.
Hodge explained, then his eyes darted to the gate.
I see a torch through the gaps of the timbers. They are upon us.
Sooner than expected. Even 3 5s was wrong.
Nares bitterly spat. His true steel blade sang as he drew it from his scabbard. Hodges and Wind's blades joined the melody that echoed briefly over the plains. The other villagers drew their faux steel blades, but theirs made no melody.
Kess, Tarks, stay alert,
he shouted up to the two villagers still in the tower. A hand signal was given in response. The pair were already crouched to avoid enemy fire. The darkness stole much of their vision as the grand star had sunk well past the horizon. The lesser stars colored the sky a navy blue but did little to light the ground itself. The other villagers were quick to stoke the central fire pit in front of the grandmother's lodge. Two then grabbed torch sticks and ran about the inner perimeter of the palisade in haste to light all the torches that hung from the walls. The entire village was soon bright with torchlight.
Everyone, keep your eyes and shields raised. Look for ladders being raised from the outside.
Hodge shouted his commands.
Get all the women and children inside with the elder. It's going to be a long night.
The bellow of beast horns came from outside of the palisade and torches blazed up in the hands of the bandits. Nares's guess was right as torches flared up on all sides save the border of the world wood. The bandits numbered a total of 35 with 11 at the center and left with the remaining 13 on the right. Each bandit wore faux steel chain shirts and leather pauldrons and carried boiled leather shields and various one-handed faux steel weapons. The left and right groups each had 3 crude ladders and were already circling about to lay them against the outer wall. Their actions made it clear they were not going to retreat and there would be no parley. Kess and Tarks relayed this down to the defenders. The pair then grabbed their bows and stood straight as they let their arrows fly. However, they had to duck right after firing, for the bandits immediately answered with their own arrows. This made it difficult for the archers to aim as they had little time to focus on their targets before having to take cover. After spending 6 of their arrows, Kess had managed to land a shot into the shoulder of one bandit carrying a ladder from the rear. He lost his grip as he fell and tripped up the one carrying it from the front. Tark smote the hide shield of another that had reached the top of a ladder and was about to vault over the palisade. Though the arrow did not harm the bandit directly, it threw him off balance. He reached forward to keep his balance, but drove the spike of a palisade timber into his own palm. With a howl, he fell back, toppling the ladder and himself onto his own allies. The villagers were not idle down below. They ran to and fro to fend off the assault. Some carried pitchforks and used them to push the ladders back the moment they thudded against the wall. A few with arbalests took aim and fired as soon as any bandit made it to the top of a ladder, but the bandits were cautious as well as persistent. They held their hide shields above their heads to fend off attacks, but the impact of the bolts flung them backwards much like Tarks's arrow. The battle continued well into the first hour with neither side obtaining a clear advantage. Kess and Tarks dropped their bows in favor of arbalests. Though longer to load, they were quicker to fire. This allowed them to shoot more accurately before having to take cover. The height of the tower allowed their bolts to travel further, but they could not make arcing shots. This change in strategy started to turn the battle in the village's favor. Kess and Tarks began to shout out numbers as their bolts found their marks. The bandits lost 6 of their own, however, the archers had lost track of the bandit rider in the shadows outside of the village. A quiet fear began to grow in the back of their minds. Suddenly, one of the bandit horns bellowed a specific pattern. 3 of the bandits took a firm grip of the front of a ladder and held it above their heads as a makeshift ramp. A large mass then dashed straight for the ladder and its paws padded swiftly along the rungs. The bandit trio grunted but held fast as the dark shape made it to the top and vaulted with all its might. It was the mastiff. The beast's dark form blotted out the stars above it as it soared over the top of the palisade. More terrifying still was the bandit riding on its back that held a loaded hand crossbow in each hand. Both were fired at once, their bolts tearing into the skulls of 2 of the villagers. They died instantly and fell to the ground, their pitchforks clattering against the earth. The battle was now turning in the bandits' favor as the villagers stood frozen at the sight of death. The bandit rider took this chance to hop off his mount. He casted aside the now useless crossbows and drew a sword of true steel with his right hand. He yelled a command to the mastiff, and it bounded towards the nearest villager and leapt, maw going right for his neck. The villager just managed to hoist up his spear and the beast clamped down on the shaft. It pinned him to the ground and viciously started to thrash its head to get at its victim. The bandit rider then charged another villager and slashed. The villager was able to raise his sword up in defense, but to no avail. The rust-colored faux steel blade snapped as the true steel blade sliced through with ease. He would have died had Hodge not regained his wits and stepped in to intercept the follow-up attack with his own blade. The clashing blades rang like the gong of a bell. Seeing his opponent with a blade of equal quality caught the bandit rider off guard. He jumped back to get away from Hodge, narrowly avoiding his counterattack.
It's not over yet.
Hodge cried, and his stern voice broke the villagers from their state. Enraged at the fall of his comrades, Nares roared and charged at the mastiff with a mighty slash. The beast was too nimble and dodged, but was forced to release his maw from the spearman. Nares gripped the spearman's hand and hauled him to his feet.
Your spear can't pierce through that beast's carapace. Leave it to me.
The ladders!
Wynne suddenly cried out. The bandits had seized this chance to double their efforts, and 2 of them managed to drop down past the palisade. Now 3 bandits and the mastiff had breached the village interior. One more was about to jump in but cried out as a bolt from the tower slammed into his chest. It shattered the links of his chain shirt and his body fell as he went limp. Luck was on the village's side. The bandit that was bracing the ladder on the outside jumped back in surprise at the scream from directly above. The fallen bandit's foot happened to hook into the rung at the top of the ladder at the same time. Since there was no one holding the ladder, the bottom rung on the outer side of the wall shot up into the air as the body swung downward and slammed into the inner wall of the palisade. Both the dead bandit and ladder somersaulted into the village, depriving the aggressors of one of their siege tools. The assault continued into the second hour. Hodge kept to the rider while Nares stayed on the mastiff. Wynne took command of the remaining 6 villagers on the ground and led the defense as bandits slowly slipped in over the ladders. Kess and Tarks did what they could to back up the ground fighters, but were restricted as the archers outside kept them at bay. The villagers did have a slight advantage as they knew the layout of the interior. The bandits did not and often found themselves lured into death traps. By the middle of the second hour, 5 more of the bandits had fallen, but also one of the villagers. Nares was starting to tire. Though his true steel sword could have easily pierced the carapace shell that surrounded the beast's torso, it outpaced him easily. It continued to nip at his legs, then jumped back before the warrior could end it with a proper stab. Sweat soaked his salt and pepper hair, and his old heart beat loudly in protest at the exertion. The beast took another nip at him, and Nares threw himself backwards while thrusting his sword forwards, hoping to catch the mastiff square in the crown. But it scampered back, and the tip of the blade only grazed its maw, drawing a trickle of blood but little more. The old warrior lost his footing and fell backwards, dropping his sword in the process. Quicker than a blink, the beast crouched low and lunged forward. Nares raised his arms defensively as the beast came down with dripping fangs heading directly for his neck. Then the sound of a great crack stung his ears. He watched in awe as a shining arrow tore into the carapace that covered the top of the mastiff's head. Tiny fragments of shell scattered into the air as the beast flopped onto the ground before Nares. Its eyes rolled back as it died. Nares' struggle had not gone unnoticed. Tarks had been keeping an eye on the fight. Once he saw the old warrior begin to tire, he dropped his arbalest to take up his bow once more. He then fetched a special arrow from his quiver, the only one with a true steel tip. It was an arrow he rarely used and always recovered when he did. Knocking the arrow, Tarks took aim and waited for his chance. Once the beast had leapt at the prone warrior, Tarks released and his aim was true. True steel was rumored to be strong enough to shatter dragon scales. While Tarks was certain that was an exaggeration from the dwarf merchant, he knew it would have no trouble ripping through the carapace of a mastiff. He took a brief moment to signal Nares, then dodged back as a bandit arrow slammed into the timbers near where his head had been. The fall of the mastiff caused the villagers to rally. The beast had been in the back of their minds with the fear of it lunging at their throats without warning. Now they could focus fully on their opponents without distraction. By the end of the second hour, 4 more bandits had fallen but also another villager. The raiders now numbered 19 with 7 inside the village and the defenders only 9. Hodge was still locked in combat with the bandit rider, whom he was certain was their leader. Earlier in the battle, he had noticed that his opponent had no claws on either of his hands. This was a bad sign. Men only removed their claws because they got in the way when wielding a weapon masterfully. Fighters would typically only remove their claws from the dominant hand. While the claws humans are born with were no match for true steel or even faux steel, they were good enough in a pinch and did not get in the way when holding a shield.
The only time a fighter removes his claws from both hands is because Tesh!
He cried out as he narrowly dodged a stab that came from the leader's other hand that now held a true steel dagger. The weapon had been hidden under his cloak and he drew it with the intention of catching his foe off guard. The blade slashed Hodge's cheek and drew blood as he skipped back in retreat.
He's trained in the Yucca style.
Before the battle had started, all the women and children had been rushed into the Elder's Lodge. It was the strongest building in the village and served both as a meeting hall and shelter against the cold during the death season. They rushed to barricade the door and hammer shut all the shutters during the first hour as the fighters kept the bandits at bay. Though now sealed in, there were still small gaps in the shutters that allowed those inside to look out and get vague glimpses of the chaos. Most of the women and children were huddled in the center with the elder, but several of the boys and 2 of the women were keeping watch with bated breath. It was at one of these shutters where Hodgetens was right now. He had been watching the whole time and shuddered with a mixture of fear and excitement.
Seems like the bastards have us sorely outnumbered, but we're still winning,
he thought to himself. The innocence of childhood and absolute faith in his father prevented him from realizing the true horror of their situation. Iorian the grandmother, the elder that had caught Hodgetens in the patch earlier, knew better. Her life had been a hard one, and this was not the first time she had been caught in a battle. She would often call on Hodgetens and the others to relay what they could witness. And what details they could not provide, she could guess from what she heard. She could easily see through Hodgetens's optimistic interpretation of the battle to the grim outcome that was inevitable. However, there was something about the battle that puzzled her.
Why aren't they using fire?
That was the question Iorian repeated in her mind. She had been waiting for the smell of smoke and ash to fill the air, but it never happened. While the palisade kept the bandits out, it also kept the defenders in with the gate sealed. They could have easily started several fires at different parts outside of the palisade. They could have also used flaming arrows and targeted the huts. This would have given another problem for the defenders to deal with during the assault.
And yet, they do not. Why? What is their goal? If it was just our harvest, there are other villages with less defenses they could pillage. The same could be said if they were after our young women. Perhaps they already struck the other villages, and we are one of the last remaining? Even if that were so, they are being far too cautious. Could it be they want the village itself? They are not only after what we have, but what we have built. That would explain it.
Yorian's thoughts were interrupted briefly at another of Hodgtens's exclamations.
The Mastiff is down. I saw it. An arrow right through its crown. I'm certain it was Tark's. He was always the best shot in the village. I'm sure they'll have the whole lot of 'em routed soon.
If only that were true, young one,
Yorian said slowly with her tired voice. It had been the first she had spoken for some time, so all eyes turned towards her. She wanted to puzzle out the bandits' motivation, but she had come to a decision and it was time for action.
Listen all of you and well. The battle is lost for us. By morning, the village of Neum will be no more.
The mood drastically changed from fear to despair. The women had long expected this and Yorian's declaration only confirmed what they knew in their hearts.
No!
The protest naturally came from Hodgtens.
My father will.
Die bravely in combat. A noble sacrifice, but only that, a sacrifice. Victory will not be ours.
Yorian cut him off.
I understand your blind faith, but we do not have the time for your outbursts. Fladif, curb your boy's tongue.
The command was given to a young woman with beautiful red hair and cream-colored skin. She was quite the contrast to the ruddy-skinned Hodge. Though the pair had never formally wed, it was not for lack of desire. They were husband and wife in all but name. Fladif stepped towards her son and placed her hands on his shoulders just as he was about to shout again. She gave him a wistful smile and said,
"Hear now, my son. The grandmother is grave, but she means well. Your father will make it out alive."
She forced a sincere smile as she lied.
"But we must listen and abide by her wisdom."
Yorian had never been one for subtlety. She was the edge of the sword, which is to say honest and reliable even to the point of harm, for a dulled blade is nigh useless. Yet, she saw the mother's words had calmed the boy, so she decided to bend the tip a little.
Though the motives of these bandits are unclear to me, it is clear they are relentless and in great numbers. There is no guarantee of our safety. If anything, we may become pawns to our enemy. You must escape.
How?
Hodgtens asked.
Foresight,
was the elder's curt response. She got up from her chair and motioned for Hodge and several of the other boys to follow. She made her way over to the stone fireplace built into the wall between the third and fourth cardinal.
Clear away the ash. Quickly now. That's it. Good. Now work together and lift up the grate.
Hodgtens looked up with a frown, his hands covered with soot and several black blotches on his face.
Is this really the time to have us clean the grate?
You'll understand soon enough. Now lift the grate. Yes. There should be a little hitch on the left side. Yes, that's it. Hodge, Kip. Work together and pull.
The two boys grunted and then there was the sound of metal scratching against stone. Their eyes widened in surprise as a hole opened up beneath them.
A tunnel? A tunnel?
Yes, a tunnel. When we first came to this village before you were born, there was a cave. It was a bear den at the time, but we cleared them out. May have even been part of a dwarf mine once upon a time. We used it as a refuge while building the village's foundations. Then built the lodge on top of the cave itself for a day like this.
Yorian got down on her hands and knees as she peered into the blackness and sniffed at the dank, stale air.
It is nearly 2 kilometers long. You will be able to escape to the other side if the land has not greatly changed.
Fladif crouched down beside the elder to peer into the depths.
And if it has?
Then you'll be no worse off than you are now.
The elder responded grimly.
But even then there will be hope. I'm too old to be traipsing about underground. Once you all go underground, I will reseal the pit and do all I can to maintain the mystery of your escape.
There was an immediate rebuke of this by those gathered, but Eorian raised her hand to silence them.
I have lived a full life. I do not fear death and even welcome it. You will understand it well when you are as old as me. It is my hope that that will be a long time off. Let me do this for you, my children. Many of you I brought into life with my own hands. Don't force these tired old eyes to see you depart from it before me.
The elder's words silenced them, and none could think of a sound argument to make. Then her eyes suddenly widened as she held a hand up to cup her ear.
No! No! It's gone quiet! There's no time to waste! Go now!
She commanded as she slowly got to her hands and knees.
But what if Father won?
Hodgten squeaked as his mother pushed him towards the hole.
Then I'll be an old fool and you'll need a bath. Never mind what might be and do as I say. Get down there and make haste through the tunnel. It is a straight path more or less. You should never have to turn too far to either the third or fourth, but there is a chance time may have opened new paths or sealed old ones.
She warned them as each child was lowered one by one into the tunnel, her eyes ever looking at the barricaded door with fear.
If the other side is somehow sealed, wait as long as you can before returning here. If great fortune favors us, someone will be down to fetch you soon. If small fortune does, then at least you might find a way to escape.
As the women began to slip down into the tunnel after the children, Fladif looked back to Eorian.
And what if it is no fortune?
The elder's gray eyes stared back into the young mother's emerald green.
That is a question that should be neither considered nor answered.
The older woman stepped forward and embraced the younger with her bony arms.
Go now, my child. You are now the grandmother. Guide and love all of them as you would your Hodgtens.
Fladif returned the embrace and kissed Eorian on her brow. Fladif then got onto her hands and knees to slide down into the tunnel last. The elder retrieved one of the lit torches and handed it down to her.
There should still be a sealed cask down below. It will have several dried torches if nature has done no mischief. That should be enough to light your way to the exit.
Fladif's sooty face looked up to the elder with tears in her eyes. The old woman gave her a tired smile in turn.
Be swift and safe, my children! May the grand star light your path!
She called after them, then slowly closed the entrance to the secret tunnel. The women and children were able to find the cask the elder had spoken of with the light of the torch. Thankfully, it had remained sealed and they were able to open it with some effort. The cask contained 5 dry torches which they quickly lit to brighten up the tunnel. This allowed them to spot the only other exit from the section they were in. Fladif took the lead and stepped through it. It became clear why the elder made the comment about it being a mine. The tunnel's walls and ceiling expanded and became lined with timber sets. Vertical props were set against the stone walls every few meters and held the series of headers along the ceiling in place. However, time had taken its toll. There were several drifts that had branched off from the tunnel they were now in, but many of the passages were now either covered with mined seals or rubble from a previous collapse. They had neither the tools or time to clear away any of the rubble. And even if the timbers of the mined seals could be broken with their claws, there was no telling what might lie beyond them. They may have been placed by the ancient dwarves to seal off passages with the invisible death or blocked off pits where mine hoists had once been. Old legends of horrors that slumbered in the depths of the world came to their minds, and they wondered if maybe some might now dwell in the darker corners of these abandoned mines. They nearly lost hope until Hodgtens made a discovery. Using the sealed shaft they had descended in through as a mark and keeping his sense of direction, he had remembered the elder's words and started exploring in between the 3rd and 4th cardinals. About 10 meters ahead he discovered a drift that was still open. Flatif patted her son on the head and took the lead once more. She directed the children to get into groups of 3 or 4 and pair up with an adult that carried a torch. Since there were only 5 other torches, some groups had 2 adults. They then began their slow journey through the mines. It was not an easy one. The tunnels were cramped at several points, and the women would have to stoop down low or crawl, and the stones and pebbles would bite their hands and knees. Several times a child would cry out in fear as they stumbled upon skeletons and other remains of those that had failed to pass through before them. The women had not the luxury to coddle the children and would take turns carrying the frightened children until they calmed down. Hodgtens's unyielding optimism proved to be a boon during these times. He would comfort the other children by telling them that everything would be all right because his father was the best swordsman in the village and he was certain all the bandits lay dead. They should just think of this as a fun little adventure in the caves and they'll be back home safe by stardim. They would then have a big celebratory breakfast and listen to their fathers tell a grand story about the battle just like the stories from their previous battles and hunts. They'd then sing songs until they fell asleep safe in their beds for a long midday rest. The women knew better but did not rebuke the boy's words. None of them had the heart to tell him that, like most tales, the menfolk's battle and hunting stories had some exaggerations and left out the more bitter parts. They could also see that the other children believed his words. The mood became slightly lighter and the children would even smile as they talked about all the things they wanted to do as soon as they were back home besides eating and resting. This soon led to another problem. The youngest children were starting to stumble. The excitement had kept them wide awake, but they had already been tired from the day's activities before the attack. That went doubly so for the mothers. No one had gotten any sleep while they were huddled in the lodge praying for a swift end to the battle. Flatif kept pressing them on. She could not be sure how long it would take for them to make it through the mines, how soon a pursuit may follow them, and whether or not it would be friend or foe. They also had no food and no water beyond the small pools that formed on the ground below, droplets falling from the ceiling. The water was most likely from the recent rains. However, it had a faint odor that Flatif was not sure would be safe to drink. She was also worried about the torches running out before they made it to the exit. While they did find some torches in sticking boards along the path and would light them, they were few and far between and some would not light at all. There had been an argument over whether or not to light them for fear of possible pursuit, but Flatif reminded them that they did not know the layout of the mine or how it may have changed over the years. Should they get lost, the lit torches would be their only guides back from whence they came. This turned out to be for the best. While they did try to follow the elders' advice and keep going between the 3rd and 4th cardinal, there had been times where it seemed they had to veer left or right down a new drift to continue. These often led to dead ends and they would have to backtrack and search for another route. Most of the time the elders' guidance turned out to be correct and there had been a path they had missed due to it being obscured by the darkness or fallen stone. Then they would have to squeeze through one at a time or clear the path using their claws. They did find some picks along the way, but all were very rusted and would break after a few strikes. The journey took much longer than expected and Hodgens's words of encouragement were losing their effect. The children began to cry and complain about how hungry and tired they were. The women were not faring any better, but they knew they had to escape the tunnel first and there was no point going back. But time continued to slowly crawl along with them, and it started to feel like they had gone well past 2 kilometers already. Suddenly Hodgtens gave a shout and pointed ahead. There at last appeared a tiny pinprick of light in the distance above their field of vision as they stepped out from a drift at the end of the tunnel. It apparently was also the last drift, for they now found themselves in a natural cave. They could see they were at the bottom of a pitch that sloped steeply upwards towards the light that they hoped was the exit. It would not be an easy climb, but the ground was rocky with many crevices the women could slip their claws into. The children were a different story. Flatif decided the adults would have to take turns carrying the children up one at a time, though it would take 3 trips. She gave her torch to Hodgtens and instructed the other 5 torches be given to the eldest children. She then had Hoddens climb onto her back as the other women carried the youngest by having them cling to their front. She explained the eldest children would stay with the rest as the women climbed up. Hodgtens would then stay at the top and the women would climb back down to repeat the process until everyone was out. It was very hard work, and the women were especially tired during the last trip up with the eldest, and thus the heaviest, children clinging to their backs. It must have been at least an hour before they reached the crest of the drift for the final time. The women were now extremely tired and their claws and fingers ached and bled. They could not yet move even though they could now see the exit not far before them. Flatif directed Hodgtens to go and take a look because the daylight was too bright to peer through after their eyes had adjusted to the dark. Squinting, he shielded his face with his hands as he slowly stepped into the light and tried to avoid stumbling on any rocks. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he could now begin to see trees taking shape around him along with green grass beneath his feet. He soon noticed something was off. At first it seemed like the grass was curving up far in front of him to touch the sky, which was also green. The light he thought was from the grand star turned out to be many lights that seemed far too big and bright for the stars in the morning. Even more trees started to emerge from the light, and his nostrils filled with the powerful smell of bark, resin, and many other scents he could not recognize. He then gave a gasp as an epiphany came to him. The green sky was not the sky at all. It was a massive canopy made from thousands of leaves that hung at least 100 meters above his head. The stars were clusters of bioluminescent mushrooms and fungi colored like rainbows that glowed with shocking brilliance. They clung to the trunks of trees and as well as patches scattered along the ground. Their spores also glowed as they hung in the air along with swarms of firetails that blinked their bottoms as they slowly flew beneath the canopy. He stood frozen with awe and fear. Soon the others joined him as he was late to return. The children were pulled back into their mother's arms once they realized where they were. They had not come to the plains that had surrounded their village. The underground path had taken them too far, and they were now in the realm of their most feared enemies. The part of the world wood dominated by the Poppets, who were also known as